On my 70th birthday, the buttercream on my cake held its shape better than my family did. 1 minute Samantha was lighting the candles like we were in a commercial for wholesomeness, and the next my son-in-law was circling the table like a gull sizing up a picnic. I should back up. I'm Leslie, retired analyst, former enthusiast of classified headaches, widowed 2 years, owner of a modest blue house with creaky floors that sing like old violins. My granddaughter, Elizabeth, is the apple of my eye and the only person who asks how I'm doing without angling toward my checkbook. The evening started sweet. The roast smelled like Sundays used to, before my husband Frank's stroke rearranged the furniture of my life. Mark poured me a generous glass of red and called it heart-healthy, which I found adorable since he's the sort who thinks vitamins are a government plot. Conversation meandered the way family talk does when folks are making small talk while their real thoughts bang pots and pans in the pantry. Elizabeth told me about a history midterm. I told her about my hydrangeas washing out to a tired pink and how I might try coffee grounds. Mark smiled too much. It was the smile of a man who brought his own pen to sign things that weren't his. Then the drift toward money began, almost politely. First it was, "College has gotten wild, Mom." From Samantha, a sigh wrapped in cashmere. Then "the roof is winking at us" from Mark, an attempt at humor that landed like a wet rag. I offered practical help, budgeting, a few ideas, some connections for financial aid. Mark nodded, eyes shiny like a raccoon near a bird feeder. The numbers bloomed larger. Tuition. Renovations. Just until the business stabilizes. That phrase has taken more hostages than I can count. I excused myself to the hallway bathroom, my favorite in their house because it had my old floral guest towel hanging there, a relic from when Samantha still asked me for recipes instead of funds. The doorknob didn't budge. Locked. Odd for a powder room. I patted around the frame like a burglar in sensible shoes and debated knocking on my own daughter's bathroom door to ask permission to use it. Finally, I turned back toward the kitchen. That's when I heard it. Stage whispers, the kind people think are gentle enough to pass for kindness. I stopped just shy of the doorway, facing a framed photo of them at a pumpkin patch, all matching scarves and pretended laughter. Samantha's voice floated first, tight and worried. "Maybe we're pushing her too hard. Let's be careful." Mark answered, "Too quick. No, we go for broke. If we can't convince her tonight, the house is our only option." I felt the floor tilt under me like a cheap funhouse. My house. There's a moment when something breaks in your mind and then reforms into something tougher. I cleared my throat, loud as a church bell, and walked back as though I'd only been admiring the new backsplash. Mark's face rearranged itself into concern. Samantha moved a bowl of rolls like she could move the conversation with it. I smiled, small and steady, and asked for the bathroom key. Samantha blinked, performed a quick little fumble, and produced it from the junk drawer that never held junk when I was raising her. I returned to the table with a fresh coat of composure. I sliced the cake. I complimented the roast again. I even let Mark tell a story about hustle that could have been titled "Why I Shouldn't Be Put in Charge of Anything Fragile." We sang, we clinked, we pretended. When I finally drove home, the night air smelled like rain and distant cut grass. I parked under the maple Frank planted the year Samantha graduated high school, and sat there with my hands on the wheel until the dashboard timer told me I'd been still for 7 minutes. 70 years will give you a library of instincts, and mine were all standing up at once. I walked inside, turned on the lamp with the seashell base, and pulled the Afghan over my knees like armor. On the mantel, Frank's photo watched me the way he used to at dinner parties, eyes twinkling with a private joke that was never unkind. "All right," I told the room, and the room listened. If they want a plan, they'll get one. And I knew exactly which closet held the case that rattled like a museum exhibit labeled, "Things your mother never told you she knew how to use." In the morning, I brewed coffee strong enough to wake a committee and hauled the gray case onto the dining table. The latches still stuck at the same corners. My hands remembered the press and swivel like an old dance step. Inside, a tidy chaos. Button cameras, pocket recorders the size of cough drops, a pen that wasn't a pen, and a handful of cables coiled like well-behaved snakes. I lined them up on a tea towel, because even mischief deserves a clean runway. Preparation makes anxious people brave. I made lists. One for gear, one for cover stories, one for errands that looked normal. Dry cleaning, cat litter, a new fern for the porch. After lunch, I tidied the living room as if company were coming, because it was, in a manner of speaking. I called Samantha with a cheerful voice that tasted like aluminum in my mouth. "Honey, I've got a new brownie recipe. What if I bring some by for lunch Wednesday?" You could hear her quick mental calculus through the phone. Free food plus opportunity equals manageable. "Perfect, Mom," she said. "We'll be home." Before Wednesday, I warmed up my skills. I replaced the battery in the fountain pen recorder and tested it by telling my cat about my morning. She flicked an ear, excellent quality control. I charged a pair of tiny cameras and practiced palming them while carrying a casserole, the way you can slide a coaster under a sweating glass without looking. Wednesday arrived bright and nosy. I wore the cardigan that says harmless and brought a heavy glass dish that says worth opening the door. Elizabeth met me first, hugging me with that quick, sincere squeeze that teenagers save for small circles. Mark called from the kitchen. "Saved you the seat with the cushion, Leslie." A showman's voice that always seemed half an octave too loud. Samantha fluttered, rearranging silverware as if anxious forks could align an anxious life. Over an easy lunch, Cobb salad, and the brownies that were really a Trojan horse, I made pleasant conversation. When Samantha dashed down the hall to check a timer and Mark took a call on the patio, I moved. Camera 1 nestled into the top shelf of their bookcase, disguised inside a hollow paperback about mindful living. Camera 2 pinched behind the coffee tin, granting a fine view of the kitchen table where all good and terrible plans are born. A microphone slid under the lip of the hall console table, its adhesive no louder than a breath. The pen recorder stayed in my cardigan pocket, blinking at me like a conspirator. I didn't linger. Boldness spoils when left out. I returned to my chair and asked Elizabeth about her history teacher, who apparently loved dates and hated staplers. I laughed, then excused myself to the powder room and with the same motion a woman uses to straighten a hand towel, fixed a tiny lens into the crown molding facing the hallway. People store their secrets between rooms. I've learned to listen where shoes change direction. That afternoon I made 2 more calls. First to Miles, a retired colleague who now lives in Arizona growing tomatoes and opinions. Kept it simple. "I need 2 reputable shadows," I said. "Quiet. No cowboys." He didn't ask for a reason. He texted me names within the hour. One woman who specialized in routine patterns, one man good at piecing paper trails together. I met them separately the next day at a diner that always smells like toast. We spoke in the friendly code of people who aren't ordering omelets for the eggs. For Samantha, I wanted travel logs, timing, any deviation from her stated schedule. For Mark, I wanted everything he called business. Receipts, meetings, where he went on Tuesday nights dressed like he was auditioning for someone else's life. I paid half up front in a crisp envelope and put the rest in a safe with a sticky note that said, "Do not celebrate early, Leslie." Back home, I set up a small command post now that would have made my younger self clap. A laptop on a TV tray, a string of timestamps pinned to a corkboard, a thermos of tea. I tested the feeds. The kitchen image sharpened into Samantha organizing a drawer that didn't need it, then standing still as if listening, then letting the drawer glide shut like a decision postponed. I have known real danger. This wasn't that. This was something smaller and sharper, the sting of a paper cut you didn't notice until the lemon. But facts are facts, and facts are a bomb. I told myself I'd collect them patiently, label them neatly, and let them point toward the next right thing. The first week brought the ordinary. Keys tossed into a bowl, coffee spoons clinking, Elizabeth humming in the hallway. It also brought the less ordinary. On Tuesday evening, the kitchen cam watched Mark lean over the table, tapping numbers into a notebook like a drummer with a 1-song set list. He made a call and used a voice he reserves for strangers he wants to impress. Low, round, the verbal equivalent of borrowed cufflinks. On Thursday, the investigator assigned to Samantha delivered the initial trickle. Photos of her leaving work, heading not to the grocery store as texted to me but to a tidy craftsman house on a street where the mailboxes wear little roofs. She brought a tote bag and a smile that looked like it belonged to an earlier version of her. She stayed for an hour and a half, emerged with damp hair on one visit, and drove home with radio station lightness. Friday's folder for Mark painted a different pattern. A hotel off the highway with a lobby plant that had given up, a restaurant where the napkins are folded into little pyramids, receipts for champagne when his credit card history to Samantha said, networking. The investigator's captioning was polite to a fault. Accompanied by a woman, overall demeanor relaxed. I appreciated the discretion even if the details tugged at old stitches. Meanwhile, the microphones did their steady work. Once a week, usually Sunday, they had private kitchen conferences after Elizabeth went upstairs to study. The recordings were the clatter of forks and phrases sharpened to a plan. They discussed my situation like I was a leaky roof. I learned the cadence of their hesitations. Samantha's worry hung on the ends of sentences like damp laundry. Mark's certainty arrived early in 8 seconds. Phrases collected themselves on my corkboard. Power of attorney, capacity assessment, it would be best for her. Schools don't give refunds. The market is ripe. There was a note about a friend of a friend who could advise on medical paperwork. I paused the tape then, made a fresh pot of tea, and let my hand rest on the counter until it stopped doing that quiet tremble that visits women who have held too much together for too long. The investigator's week 2 portfolios deepened the contrast. Samantha's routine included visits to the Craftsman house, sometimes on her lunch break, sometimes after work when she texted me, late at the office. There were photos of her carrying in containers, casseroles I suspect, and once a stack of those reusable cloth napkins she loves. She looked lighter. I made no verdict, just pinned the evidence and drew a line. Mark, conversely, lived like a man sprinting between mirrors. Hotel check-ins with the same alias he once bragged about using for discount memberships. Subtlety was never his strong suit. Dinners that started at 8 and bled into midnight. A receipt for a boutique gift shop where the clerk, according to the report, called him by a first name that wasn't his. His business calendar, the one he would share at family dinners, bore only a friendly relationship to reality. My recordings from the house crystallized the plan's spine. "We need her to agree to consolidate," Mark said one night, fork pointing like a general's baton. "If she balks, there are ways to demonstrate she's not managing. Everyone expects it at her age." Samantha didn't answer right away. The silence between them felt like a hallway with too many closed doors. Then she said, very small, "But she's my mother." Mark sighed the way people sigh when they want to be applauded for their patience. "And we'll take good care." From a distance. I have been accused of over-preparing, possibly fair. But that night I labeled and duplicated every file. One copy in my home safe, one with the investigator who knew about paper trails, and because old habits die like sturdy weeds, one stored off-site in a locker paid for in cash where the only other tenants are beach chairs and forgotten skis. I learned a long time ago that truth travels better with a buddy. In those days I kept my social face polished. I brought over lemon bars. I asked about deadlines. I let Mark show me a spreadsheet that might as well have been written in crayon. I told Elizabeth the first was proud of her for studying hard, and for the way she remembered to text me when she got home after dark. I slept no, I rested in short, useful chunks and woke with a clear head and a list. I wasn't searching for drama. I was compiling a map. Changing a will is less romantic than the movies imply. There were no gasps, no thunderclaps, just a tidy conference room that smelled faintly of lemon cleaner and a lawyer with neat eyebrows who had handled our paperwork since Frank and I first drew a line between yours, mine, and ours. I brought documents, dates, and a face that said I knew exactly what I was doing. I did. I removed Samantha as beneficiary. I added Elizabeth with provisions that encouraged her to finish school and discouraged everyone else from hovering like bees over a picnic pie. I included language about capacity evaluations that would make any casual meddler reach for aspirin. My lawyer didn't pry. He has the good sense to understand that older women arrive at decisive moments with a great deal already decided. He asked only, "Would you like a cup of water?" I took one. My voice has always sounded steadier after a sip. Outside, the sky had that pewter look that Midwesterners call, "maybe later." I took the longer route home, past the park where Elizabeth toddled between my knees once upon a time, and past the bakery where Frank bought me a chocolate croissant every first Saturday for 29 years. I let nostalgia put its arm around me and then politely asked it to scoot over. There was plenty of day left. The kitchen recordings continued. If the previous weeks had sounded like brainstorming, these sounded like outlines. They listed needs, tuition, roof repairs, seed money. They rehearsed phrases meant to sound loving but firm. "It's best for you" featured often, as did "simplify" and "we're in this together." Samantha's voice had the soft lint of guilt all over it. Mark's carried the shine of ambition. I wrote their words down not to punish but to remember exactly how people reveal themselves when they think no one is keeping minutes. The Sunday invitations kept arriving. Dinner this week? I went. I brought a salad that could mind its own business and a bottle of grocery store Merlot that looked expensive if you squinted. I offered small checks here and there, the kind that solve a genuine problem for a month and create an illusion of control for 2. I wanted them comfortable, predictable, certain that their river flowed the way rivers always had, downhill toward me. Then came the suggestion presented like a blessing. Samantha twined her fingers. She does this when she's nervous, and said they were thinking of selling their house and moving in with me. For a while. More family time, more help for me, more stability. She used words like harmony and continuity. Mark spoke of logistics with the zeal of a man who believes a plan is a talisman. I smiled into my napkin. It's a big step, I said, which is an accurate sentence in nearly every scenario. They nodded earnestly. The strategy, I realized, wasn't a sudden grab but a gradual redecoration of my boundaries, one throw pillow at a time. In my own home, I moved a little differently. I made a list titled Company Protocol, which sounds military but was mostly common sense turned up to 11. I created a fresh set of labeled folders for bills. I photographed every room and tucked the prints into a manila envelope, not because I feared theft, though that too, but because memory is slippery during transitions and I like to know what was where and why. Elizabeth and I met for cocoa at a cafe that lets people linger without buying a second drink. We talked about finals and rain boots and whether oversized scarves were still a thing. I kept my face open and my questions gentle. I didn't place my worries on her shoulders. She has her own backpack to carry. But I looked for signs. Was she being pulled into adult storms? She seemed steady, tethered by her own good sense and the kind friends a grandparent prays for. When Samantha officially floated the moving date over a bowl of potato chowder, I tilted my head like a weather vane and said, "All right, let's try it." You learn over the decades to step into cold water one toe at a time while never losing sight of the ladder. I had my ladder. I also had a sewing box full of sour candies which seemed relevant at the time. The sale of their house unfolded with the brisk cheerfulness of a real estate brochure. Samantha staged rooms with throw blankets that matched nothing on purpose, because apparently eclectic sells. Mark negotiated as if he were haggling for a pirate ship. I baked cookies for open houses, set out on a plate that said, "Gather," and generally played the role of benevolent matriarch while inside I kept a ledger of every promise uttered and every shrug that followed. When the for sale sign sprouted its little sold rider, we toasted with lemonade in plastic cups. Samantha cried in that tidy way that doesn't smudge mascara. Mark talked about liquidity. Elizabeth took a photo of the 3 of us, our smiles arranged like place settings, necessary, not quite natural. The closing date landed on a Thursday. Paperwork multiplied. I watched the stack grow, thinking of the time Frank and I signed our first mortgage, hands shaking for joy not fear. Then came the question of residency. "Let's get everything official," Mark said, producing forms he'd printed with the confidence of a man who thinks printers obey him. Easier for mail utilities, you know. I made approving noises and fetched my reading glasses. What they signed were copies, beautiful, neat, utterly inert. I filed the authentic documents with Elizabeth's name only, precisely where they needed to be, with timestamps that would make any clerk smile. The others went into a folder labeled recipes, which is my private joke and also an excellent deterrent because no one in this family has ever looked voluntarily through recipe cards. They moved in on a Saturday. Boxes arrived like migrating geese. Samantha unpacked sheets and asked about linen closets, and I pointed cheerfully while keeping my mental list. What comes in, what goes where, what returns. Mark installed his desk in the sunroom and called it an office, as if natural light would lend credibility to his spreadsheets. I offered the guest room with the quilt my mother made. Samantha hugged me and murmured, "We'll make this so good for you, Mom." I patted her shoulder and said, "We'll make it good for us." The first week was a honeymoon. Dishes washed themselves, or rather Samantha washed them and Mark dried exactly 2 before wandering off to make calls. I woke to the smell of coffee already brewed, pleasant if a little strong. Elizabeth floated in and out with a book under her arm, and asked if she could reorganize my pantry for fun. I said yes. The labels made me giddy. Week 2, small rearrangements appeared. My favorite chair migrated 3 inches left to improve flow. My Afghan took a field trip to a linen basket. A stack of mail had Mark's impatient finger marks on it. Nothing worth a scene, everything worth a note. The kitchen camera watched quiet conversations after I excused myself early with a smile and a yawn. They spoke in that low, leaning way, as if the table were sharing secrets back. Samantha brought up investments, how a little seed money could make Mark's venture sprout vines. I asked about business plans, about burn rates, about benchmarks. Mark waved a hand like an orchestra conductor signaling the violins to soften. I wrote his answers down anyway. Numbers, I've learned, don't mind being rudely questioned. Their old house closed. The proceeds landed where they said they'd land, then began to sprout mysterious expenses like mushrooms after rain. Temporary, I was assured. Short bridge. I nodded and made muffins. And I made 2 new house rules that sounded like hospitality but were actually fences. No major purchases without a conversation, and everyone labels leftovers. It's incredible what that second one reveals about character. When Elizabeth asked if she could keep a key on a little sunflower keychain, I slipped it on her palm and squeezed. She squeezed back, the silent Morse code between women who recognize a tide and prepare their boats without making a fuss. I slept with my chair tilted back in the living room more than once, pretending I fell into a doze over a crossword when in fact I wanted to know which doors creaked after midnight and who tugged them. Patterns always announce themselves if you give them a calendar and a pen. Mark's late calls synchronized with evenings that didn't require his presence at my dinner table. Samantha's quick errands overlapped with stretches when she returned lighter, humming under her breath, the way people do when they've been in a room where their name is said kindly. I observed, recorded, and withheld judgment the way a librarian with a secret gavel might. Then came Tuesday. Rain in the gutters and a brisk wind that combed the maple out front. Samantha took Elizabeth to a study group. Mark left in a rush, claiming a meeting with men who wear loafers without socks. The house exhaled. I made chamomile and considered the sunroom, where Mark's laptop sat like a rooster on a fence. I do not snoop, I audit. And that day the audit felt overdue. The password trick wasn't a trick at all. Mark's favorite alias, flavored with the number pattern he uses for everything from gym lockers to loyalty cards. The desktop bloomed, folders named Pipeline, Investors, and God Bless Arrogance. Contingency. I opened Contingency. Inside, a neat document with bullet points and a timeline. The headline, Property Transition Plan. My jaw didn't drop. My eyebrows did a small private wiggle that would have made my sister laugh. He had notes about contacting a realtor who specializes in delicate situations. He referenced a friend named John Batten with emails threaded below. I scrolled. John asked casually what the plan was for placement. Mark replied that an evaluation would demonstrate I required full-time care, and that it would be simpler after certain legal pieces were organized. He'd included a calendar. Within a month. I closed the laptop with the tenderness one reserves for unpleasant insects in jars. In the mirror over the mantel, my face looked like my mother's right before she politely ended a conversation with a door. I slid a notebook from the shelf where I keep crossword dictionaries and wrote down dates, names, phrases. Scribble, underline, star. The next morning, I invited Elizabeth for waffles at the diner that gives extra syrup if you smile at the waitress. I told her not everything but enough. About worries. About seeing people more clearly than they expect you to. I watched her eyes, the way they widened and then steadied. Grandma, she said, voice small but firm, what do you want me to do? The question landed in my chest like a warm stone settling into a river. I handed her a new key, gold and unfussy, on a keychain that looked like a tiny brass door. Hold on to this, I said. If ever you arrive and things are not right, use this, not whatever someone hands you. She nodded, slipping the key into her backpack like a secret letter. Then I gave her an envelope with travel documents tucked inside. A treat, I said, trying to make my grin mischievous and not maternal. 7 days to chase sunshine and mango smoothies with a school friend who's already going. You've been diligent. Go be young. She blinked fast, then hugged me in that rip sincere way. Are you sure? She murmured. 1000%, I said. The timing was perfect. Exams ending, fares favorable, The household due for a strategic absence of the only witness I couldn't stand to see uncomfortable. For 3 days we moved like actors in a play that only I knew the ending of. Samantha discussed paint swatches for refreshing my living room. Mark complained about a contractor's invoice with the bluster of a man who misplaces his wallet inside his other wallet. I clipped coupons just to keep my hands busy. On the 4th day, Elizabeth rolled her little suitcase down the front steps, waved at the maple, and left for the airport. I waved back and felt the house lean in to listen. It was time to stop collecting and start arranging. The morning air had that crisp promise that makes bread rise. Samantha and Mark had meetings. Plural slippery. I stood in my kitchen, wrote 3 names on a sticky note, and put it face down by the sugar jar. The locksmith, my neighbor Dale, and my lawyer. The kettle clicked off. I drank half a mug because a full mug announces nerves. First, the locksmith. All of them? He asked, gazing at my ring of brass circles. Every last one, I said, sweet as pie. We walked the perimeter like gardeners, nodding at doors that had seen better paint. He worked with the soft clatter of a person who enjoys making order. The new keys felt cool in my palm, light but decisive. I attached one to a plain fob and placed it on the hook by the back door where I keep things I trust. Dale arrived with his easy grin and a toolbox that has opinions. He's the kind of neighbor who will loan you a ladder, and then check the stability of your porch just because he's there. I told him I was doing a little home refresh, which in a sense was true. We fixed a sticky window. We checked the smoke detectors. We carried down 2 boxes from the guest room that were very much not mine and placed them, gently but clearly, in the garage. Boundary setting can be quiet work. Next, the paperwork folder. I slid the authentic residency documents, Elizabeth's registration and the notarized notes about ownership, into the top slot of my safe. Under that, copies of the investigator reports, itemized and dated. Under that, the thumb drive with recordings labeled by week and room. I put a fresh note on the inside of the safe door. If found by anyone other than Leslie, call Attorney R. At once. It felt melodramatic and also prudent, which is my favorite combination. By early afternoon, the house looked like itself again. My chair re-inhabited its old indent in the rug. My Afghan draped its familiar arm. The pantry labels remained. Thank you, Elizabeth, because good improvements deserve tenure. I baked a batch of oatmeal cookies and let the cinnamon fill the corners. People underestimate the tactical advantage of comfort. At 4, I placed 2 manila envelopes on the kitchen table, each with a name, each containing a letter written in a tone I rehearsed aloud. Firm, unadorned, gracious where possible. The letters made clear the facts. Their residency had not been formalized. The keys had changed. Their personal items could be collected at a scheduled time. Any further conversation would occur with a third party present. I added a small list of community resources for temporary housing, because being kind costs so little and buys so much peace in the long run. They returned near sunset, surprised to find the deadbolt's new personality. Phones rang. Voices on the porch rose, then flattened. Samantha tried the back door. I met her through the glass with a wave and the envelope. Mark stalked to the front. Dale, who just happened to be tinkering with his truck, lifted a hand in hello so casual it diffused the spark before it could find kindling. I opened the storm door a polite inch. There are letters with everything you need, I said. I'll be in touch to schedule pickup of your things. Mark started a speech. I held up a palm the way teachers do with students who need a reset. Not tonight. I did not explain. I did not accuse. Explanation is what people demand when they sense their leverage evaporating. I simply closed, locked, and turned away, my heart pounding like a distant drum that belonged to someone else. Inside, the house sounded big, the way rooms do after guests leave. I made tea. I sat with the ordinary clinks of a spoon and exhaled in increments. The maple outside kept its counsel. I wrote the day's date on the corkboard in neat script and underlined it once, then twice. That night, if you can call the hours between late and early a night, I read a chapter of a mystery novel whose solution I already guessed and allowed calm to arrive in layers. Not triumph. Not gloating. Just a return to the temperature my life is meant to keep. Morning brought gentle light and a message from Elizabeth. A photo of a beach in her toes, captioned with 3 sun emojis and, "Miss you." I sent back a picture of my oatmeal cookies and, "Miss you more. We're a sentimental pair." I've made my peace with it. The next days were the administrative sort that look dull from the outside but feel like sorting a junk drawer and finding the bottom. My lawyer received the thumb drive and the duplicate folder of documents. He called to say, "Well organized," which is the legal equivalent of a standing ovation. The investigators delivered their final reports, which I filed in a box labeled, "In case of future fiction." I scheduled times for item retrieval, stayed present with a witness, and kept conversations brief and factual. Civility wielded correctly is a velvet rope. News of Mark traveled in fragments the way gossip does on group texts that include neighbors, cousins, and the yoga instructor who somehow knows everything. He left town, it was said. A fresh start elsewhere, unencumbered by the complications he'd intended to leave me. Samantha stayed. Our exchanges were measured, then muted, then finally quiet. I did not press. Sometimes pauses are instructions. Elizabeth returned glowing with stories about fruit that tasted like sunshine. We sat at the kitchen table, spread out postcards, and circled the calendar for her move-in at college. She asked once carefully if I was all right. "Better than," I said, and meant it. I gave her a small envelope for emergencies and told her my favorite trick for first weeks anywhere. Find the nearest place that sells good bread and the campus library's quietest floor. She laughed, the kind of laugh that puts air back into a room. As summer bent toward fall, life resettled into its familiar rhythms, the hum of the refrigerator, the way the house sighs at dusk. I planted bulbs along the walk. I joined a book club that mostly talks about soup. I learned the new names of neighbors' dogs because people always tell me, and I always listen. Every so often, Samantha's name flashed on my phone. We exchanged pleasantries with the cautious politeness of diplomats. I did not bring up the past. I did not offer the future. Trust is a bridge you rebuild plank by plank, and only if the river's worth crossing. I suspect time will make us something functional, perhaps even kind. But I carry my own keys now, and my home recognizes my step. On a cool Wednesday, I pulled down the gray case from the closet shelf. I opened it, checked that everything was present and accounted for, then closed it with a clean click. I slid it back into the dark where it belongs until it doesn't. Some tools are not for display, they're for assurance.
Share your thoughts in the comments. If you discovered a family member plotting behind your back, would you confront them right away or play the long game? If you liked the story, subscribe to the channel and give us a like.